Hi, I'm Ellie Waddington, a hypnobirthing teacher, positive birth advocate, and mum to two feral but adorable children. You are listening to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. This podcast is here to empower you with the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need for a calm, positive birth experience. Together, we'll tackle the big questions, bust some myths, and share practical tips for your journey into motherhood. Plus, you'll hear inspiring real birth stories from mums who've been there, and expert guests sharing their wisdom and insights. Whether you're planning your first or adding to your tribe, I've got you covered, so let's dive in. Hey gorgeous mama, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. If you are new here, welcome. I am so glad that you found us. If you are not new here, welcome back. I hope that your pregnancy journey is going absolutely amazingly and that you're enjoying the content and that you are well on your way to having your amazing positive birth experience. This week, I was joined by the legendary Milli Hill, who of course wrote the Positive Birth Book, which is a book that I recommend to all my clients, anyone that I come across that's pregnant, anyone that wants to get informed about their birth. It is the most amazing book, and I used it during my second pregnancy. And so when I reached out to Milli Hill and asked, would you like to come on the podcast? You know, a part of me was like, oh, she's really busy. She's a big famous author, and she probably won't even see my message, but then she came back and said yes. And I was seriously fangirling over here. I was like, oh my gosh, the Milli Hill is coming on my podcast. And I'm not going to lie, I was actually quite nervous going into this interview, but I really shouldn't have been, because Milli is the most lovely person to talk to. And, who'd have thought it? Authors, they're just normal people, just like you and me, just normal people to talk to. So, without further ado, here is my chat with the most amazing, most wonderful Milli Hill. So, hi Milli, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I'm so excited to have you here. Could you please start off just by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your story, kind of where you've been over the last sort of 10 or so years and how you got to doing what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. So I'll try and summarize it as briefly as I can, but it's becoming a longer and longer story by the day. So basically, like many women, I sort of was woken up to all of the issues around pregnancy and childbirth by becoming a mum myself. Before that, I was a group therapist using a kind of therapy called drama therapy. And so then I became a mum. And I think as a feminist, I've always been a feminist. I kind of was quite alerted to the issues around birth straight away, just by the way people were relating to me differently and the way the power dynamic had changed. So I kind of, lots of little light bulbs went on for me. And anyway, to cut a long story short, by the time, I've got 3 children, but by the time I'd had baby number 2, I'd started writing a mummy blog, as they used to be called back then. And I started writing quite a lot about birth, and that became quite popular. And then I got some work as a journalist, writing about birth and pregnancy and motherhood. And through that sort of platform that I'd created through writing, I started an organization called the Positive Birth Movement. And the Positive Birth Movement was a kind of amalgamation of lots of ideas. When I look back on it, I can kind of see the different threads of how it kind of came into being in my mind. But I think some of it was from my therapy background, especially group therapy, that idea of a circle of women all listening to each other's stories and supporting each other, and the kind of the power that comes from hearing other people's fears spoken aloud, that you kind of get in group therapy, and hearing people share their feelings. And also, I think the smashing the power dynamic was another thing that fed into it, bringing women together on a level playing field. So rather than it being like an antenatal class, it was a peer-to-peer support group. Also, I'd been to La Leche League breastfeeding meetings, and I thought that was an amazing thing, very similar model. And also at the time, social media was really burgeoning. Facebook was the place where everybody was. It's hard to believe now. And this is like 14 years ago. And Facebook was really smashing that power dynamic as well, because women were talking to other women about the advice they were being given about their pregnancies, and they were getting information from women in different parts of the country, women in different parts of the world. So through all those ideas coming together, I started the Positive Birth Movement, and that ran for nearly a decade. And it was a network of real life women's groups linked up by social media. And then through that, I wrote the Positive Birth book, which is a really popular pregnancy guide. Then I wrote a book called Give Birth Like a Feminist, which is more a sort of polemic on, why birth is a feminist issue. And now I'm mainly concentrating on writing. So I've got a new book coming out in the summer called Ultra Processed Women, which is a departure in a way from the subject of birth, but it's still about female bodies. And in this case, how, our modern diet is affecting them. So is that a good enough potted history?
That is perfect. Thank you very much. So, when you started the positive birth movement, what did you feel at that time was kind of missing from maternity care, and what from that led you to set up that kind of that group?
Yeah, well, like I say, I think there were sort of two things: information and power, really. So, um, women talking to other women, and as I said, so being able to do that through social media was really fresh and new then, and being able to share information in that way, and not just go to your doctor or your midwife to ask what should I do about X, Y, or Z, but be able to go to another group of women, in your Facebook group, who may or maybe in Australia, and ask them what they thought was really quite a shake up of the existing power dynamic. So yeah, there's that, and also I think positive birth stories and images was another thing that was really, it's hard to cast your mind back, and some people might not have even, who are listening, might have been too young to even think about all this stuff 14 years ago. But because now we take for granted that Instagram is absolutely rammed full of beautiful birth videos that are all shot, with like maybe two cameras and sound and lighting and music and candles and everything. But then there wasn't anything like that. There was hardly any birth films you could see online or images of women giving birth. And all of those sort of visual, powerful images, but also the women's birth stories being shared, I think was missing, and that was another big part of the positive birth movement, was to encourage women to share their positive birth stories. And obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean they're home candlelit, perfect textbook birth stories, but just birth stories in which they felt positive, that they felt were positive for them. So those are the two things I think, really.
Yeah, and I really do kind of hammer that home with my clients is that a positive birth doesn't look necessarily a particular way. It's how you feel about it. If you come away from your home birth or your C-section or your induction feeling like you were in control, you understood everything that was happening, and you felt like you had a good experience, and that's a positive birth.
Exactly. And I think women are so used to there being a kind of ulterior motive to things, that when it all boils down to it are about sort of controlling and judging them, that they're suspicious of any information like that. And I have felt that many times, people being suspicious of the idea of the positive birth movement, because I think they think, oh, this is just another prescription of a way that women have to do things in a certain way. And if they don't, they're getting it wrong and they're going to be judged. So that was the whole idea of the positive birth movement in a way. Was it's not natural birth movement or anything. It's putting the definition back into the hands of women, saying, look, if you say that this experience was positive for you, then it's a positive birth. It's not what Milli Hill thinks or what anybody else thinks. But I think that makes people nervous. They're like, oh, no, there must be a way of judging women through this. Hypnobirthing is the same, isn't it? It's like there's this idea in hypnobirthing that there has to be a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I know that isn't what actual hypnobirthing is about, but it's the way it's perceived. And if you're screaming and shouting and like you throw a chair across the room and tell your partner to F off, then that you can't be doing hypnobirthing properly. It's got to be serene and calm, like some sort of yoga video. But as you know, it's all about what works for the woman. It shouldn't be about anybody external making rules.
Well, quite. And ultimately, hypnobirthing is about what the way that I describe it. Hypnobirthing is about coping, it's about managing. And if your way of coping is to make noises, if your way of coping is to make these kind of animalistic sounds and move and do whatever you need to do, then that's your way of coping. That doesn't mean that it's not a positive birth.
Exactly. it's all about what women want and listening to women, and women being authentic and trusting themselves.
Yeah. And did you find any kind of resistance when you did start to set up the positive birth movement? Was anyone kind of against it?
I don't think anyone was. I mean, not sort of in any major way against it, but I think there were always ripples from the kind of the birth safety campaign angle, which has grown over the past sort of decade and a half, definitely, and become quite a lot more influential. I find it such a shame that there's this ideological battle between safety and experience all the time. So I think there was always that undercurrent, and also, like, I think that's kind of epitomized in this comment that I've written about, because it was quite funny, that one man made to me once when I was running the positive birth movement, and I explained to him what it was. He said, "Oh, that's interesting. What's that?" And I explained it to him, and he said to me, "Oh, is that safe?" And I thought that was just so funny, because it's like a group of women talking to each other without an expert, in inverted commas, in the room. And in fact, often there were experts, if that's what you want to call them, in the room, because the groups were run by hypnobirthing teachers, midwives, doulas, whatever, or just by women who'd given birth. But this idea of women talking to women being somehow unsafe, I think I think there was a little bit of that resistance, sort of culturally, to it, that they couldn't be, it couldn't be as good as an antenatal class, or it may even be sort of slightly dangerous for women to take birth into their own hands. Same with the social media discussions. I mean, you still hear that now. Women getting funny ideas on the internet about birth. That sort of idea that women are a bit stupid, really, and if they're very easy to influence into being, making the wrong decisions. They need someone to guide them. You know.
Yeah, that's mad. I completely understand what you mean. The idea of women talking and exchanging ideas, that's, so dangerous.
Yeah,
Let's put an end to that.
yeah.
So did you ever find there were ever kind of cultural, uh, what am I trying to say? So obviously it turned into a global movement. So you mentioned women in Australia, women from all over the world. Did you ever find there any kind of cultural differences, as in like people on the other side of the world that were struggling to get the positive birth movement going in their areas?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were groups in almost there were groups in every continent except for Antarctica, I think, and in almost every country. It was incredible when it was at its peak. And yes, there are cultural differences, but I think the deeper things that are underpinning everything are fairly similar, whatever country you're talking about, really. Um, Women having bodily autonomy, women being trusted to make decisions for themselves, um, medicalization of birth that's often unnecessary. All of those things are everywhere, whatever country we're talking about. So that the deeper, more underlying stuff is the same wherever you go.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. So since you sort of started this journey and you started writing, started the positive birth movement, what are kind of the biggest changes that you've noticed in the maternity world in that time?
Well, it's kind of a mix, really. I mean, I think lots of things have changed for the better, and obviously, still because of the internet and social media, as much as we all, loathe it in many ways, I think it has been really good for women, not just because of me and the positive birth movement, but just in a wider way of, it allowing women to see and hear positive birth images and stories and talk to each other, and get more information and understand more about their rights in childbirth, which, again, it's easy to forget that sort of even 20 years ago, the whole idea of human rights in childbirth was like, people didn't know what that meant. I joke about this, the Peter Kay garlic bread sketch, where it's like two things that just you've never heard together before, like garlic bread, like human rights in childbirth. People are just like, what? I can remember when I first talked to people about it, they were like, what? Human rights in childbirth. So that's really changed, that women know now that, that they do have rights and that they can say what they want. Not all women know that yet, but I think that idea has spread. So in one way, that's really positive. But on the other hand, I think we're seeing quite a big backlash against that in a way. And maybe it is literally a backlash, or maybe it's a coincidence. But the medicalization of childbirth appears to be continuing its march upwards on the graphs. Induction and cesarean, are reaching epic proportions. So we've got one happening and the other happening, and for a lot of women, women with less resources, whether that's privilege, money, education, being able to go to a hypnobirthing class, knowing that a book might help, thinking that a book is for them, being able to get a doula. Those are the women who are going into the system unarmed. I got told off once by a doctor for using military language about it, but I mean, it is a bit like that, isn't it? And they're going in, and they get what they get, and they haven't got much of a voice. So that's
and
still a big problem.
I'm still, like, after all this time, I still get women that book onto my hypnobirthing courses. And when we do the sessions about making choices, and I say, well, you can decline or accept anything you want, and they still look shocked at that. They still, like, it's a brand new idea that they can decline anything. Like, I say, look, you don't legally even have to go to an appointment if you don't want to, and that's completely alien because we're just so conditioned from early childhood to do exactly what the medical professionals tell us, that idea of saying no to something is completely alien.
Yeah, I know. I've had that experience loads of times, especially when I used to go and talk at the baby show, which sometimes people used to criticize me for doing because I know that, the people that run the baby show have got some links to the arms trade or something. And, it's some people just boycott it on that basis. But I used to go because it was one way of really connecting with people like that who'd never heard these ideas before. I got to stand on my little stage and tell them about, how they could decline a vaginal exam if they wanted to. And it was like every time I did it, like you say, I had 150 people stood in front of me and their jaws were on the floor because no one had ever told them that before. And the other thing that I always used to say to people, and it's really important, is that you don't have to decline everything. It's not about saying to people, oh, you just, don't have any scans, have a home birth, don't have a midwife, don't let the midwife touch you. It's not like that. You've got to think of it in terms of the power dynamic and how the power dynamic changes. The underlying unspoken power dynamic changes when you don't know that you have got any choices, where you just feel like everything that happens to you is out of your hands. So it's not about telling women to say no to things. It's about telling women that they can if they want to. They might not want to, but that it's their choice.
Yeah, and I always make the point as well that consent isn't just about saying no or yes, it's about understanding everything you're saying yes or no to. It's instead of just blindly ticking a box, make sure you ask questions. Like, say to your provider, okay, why are you recommending this? Are there any alternatives? What are the risks to this? And doing your own research as well. And if at the end of all that you do want the induction, that's great, but that's on your terms. That's not just because you've been told to do that. It's because you've done your research and that's the right decision for you.
Exactly, and then that changes how you feel about it because you've made your peace with it, haven't you? You've understood the options, you've thought about it, and you have made a decision. Whereas, in another scenario, you might feel, I think it's that feeling of things having gotten out of control that often is what leads to women feeling traumatized by birth. Is that they felt voiceless, they felt, like a piece of meat. Sometimes they'll say so. It's just being able to get in the driving seat and think about your decision, even if it means that you end up having an emergency cesarean or whatever. It still can feel like a positive experience because you can, and that's where really brilliant midwives come in. If they will be with a woman and explain and hand it over to her, have the courage to hand the decision to her, she will make the right decision. That's the other thing, is this, it comes back to the trusting women thing, isn't it? And I do think there are lots of parallels with the discussions around abortion as well, because it's like this fear that if you give women choices, they're not going to do the right thing. They're going to have abortions when they're 35 weeks pregnant, whatever. Because women are not children. They're not irresponsible. They care very much, and they will make the right decisions if they're given the opportunity. And maybe, yes, there might be one or two who make the wrong decision, but then that's always going to happen anyway. You still
Yeah,
have
and
to
I
give
think
women choices.
exactly. And it's kind of having that ability to stand back and let women make their own choices. And there are people that I, couples that I work with, and they make choices that I would never make, but that's not for me to say. I've given them the information, and that's
Yeah.
the choice that's right for them. And I just think there are some areas of the medical profession that really struggle with that. They really struggle with a grown adult woman making a decision that they don't agree with.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great Margaret Atwood quote that's in Give Birth Like a Feminist. A rat in a maze is free to go anywhere as long as it stays inside the maze. And that's, translates so well to maternity care. Of course, they will defend, they'll say, of course, women are free to make choices. But then if you talk to the women who've tried to make choices that don't fit in with the norm, then you will find that all of them will say, some of them have been referred to psychologists, some of them have been referred to social services, some midwives who've tried to practice outside of the maze have been prosecuted or vilified. So it's the freedom to make choices has to be the freedom to make choices that the system doesn't approve of. Otherwise, it's not true freedom.
Yeah, and I really hate that term that a lot of medical professionals will use, where they go to consent somebody. It's not to like to get consent for it. It's to get this to consent them. It's to make them consent to what it is you want them to do.
Mm, yeah, that's a classic, isn't it? A sort of language that says it all and
Yeah.
is used all the time with people not realizing that they're completely giving themselves away.
Yeah. And I can remember during my first birth wasn't a great experience, and it's what led me on to hitting a birthing with my second and the rest of my journey. But with my first, I can remember being on my back on the hospital bed with my legs up in stirrups, and the room full of strangers, and the doctor was literally there, like holding the forceps and the scissors and whatever, and he was saying, "Do I have consent to do this?" What am I gonna say? Like, I'm there with my legs in the air, room full of strangers. I'm not going to say, well, can you please explain the risks and benefits to me? That's not consent to me. But what do I do in that situation?
So, do you wish that he'd asked you? I mean, did they ask earlier? I mean, it's very strange to do it at that point, isn't it?
Yeah. So honestly, I take responsibility for my own situation in that birth, because I didn't do any prior research. I didn't learn about my rights. I didn't know that I had rights. I didn't make any birth plans, didn't research anything. And so a lot of what happened, I feel like could have been avoided had I known a bit more about the human body and about my rights and what have you, because I was on my back birthing and I was trying to move onto my knees, but I had a midwife who kept telling me to stay on my back. And if I'd have known a bit more about my rights and about the human body, I would have told her, no, I'm going onto my knees. That's what my body's telling me to do. And so because I was pushing on my back for 2 hours and the baby didn't move, that's when they called in the doctor for the episiotomy and the forceps. And I still to this day, I'm 95% sure that had I gone onto my knees like my body was telling me to, that I wouldn't have needed the forceps. But I didn't have the wherewithal to know that at the time. I thought the medical professionals all know best. I'm gonna
Yeah.
follow exactly what they're saying, which is why I got very prepared and very knowledgeable for my second birth to make sure I wasn't in that situation again.
But I have to say, Ellie, as well, that I think women do blame themselves. It upsets me a bit to hear you taking the blame for that, because we've got a system here that's not. The system is to blame, and women blaming themselves is a sort of universal issue, isn't it? Women blaming, women taking the blame. For example, in sexual assault and rape, it's a classic thing that we hear all the time. The woman being blamed. Why was she out so late? Why was she wearing that skirt? Why was she talking to him anyway? Um, And I see that mirrored in women's the way women talk about those sorts of birth experiences, and it kind of brings out the same anger in me, because I just feel like, why should you have had to read all the books and do all the preparation and learn about your human rights in childbirth in order to avoid that happening to you? Why? I mean, you have to rewind the clock so far, don't you? It goes back further than even the beginning of a woman's pregnancy. But why do we live in a world where women are discouraged somehow from tuning into their own bodies? You know, that's not your fault. You knew what you wanted to do. You knew you wanted to move, but you didn't listen to that voice, and that isn't your fault. And then that woman who has had some sort of disconnect culturally, socially, historically from listening to her voice was then put into a system that doesn't support women listening to their voices or their bodies either. So the fact that you then went on to have that birth, and by the way, I also had an episiotomy and forceps delivery for my first baby, so I really hear you on how that is. The fact that that happened to you was, it shouldn't have to be on your shoulders. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and I do. A part of me does feel that. Like a part of me really does feel that, and that's exactly what I tell any of my clients that come through that have had a similar experience first time round. Um, but it is very difficult knowing that had I just done a bit of reading, then that could have been different. But at the same time, if I hadn't have had that first experience and had it in such contrast with my second birth, I wouldn't have gone on the journey that I'm on, like helping other women through that. If I'd had a very positive first birth experience, I don't know that I would have discovered hypnobirthing. I don't know that I would have become a hypnobirthing teacher.
Yeah. And speaking as another woman in the forceps club, I can tell you that I did all the reading in my first pregnancy, and I mean, I was like, I treated it as an academic project, and I still ended up on my back with my feet in stirrups. So yeah, I think it's complicated, isn't it? But I think, that what was missing for me was not so much knowledge, but confidence. And I think that is a cultural thing, that women don't believe. It's very birth is very frightening. I was very frightened. I didn't believe that I could give birth because it just looked impossible to me, and terrifying. And then what you then need is for the people around you to have confidence. And I'm not sure that the system has confidence in women's ability to give birth either. My second birth, I got independent midwives, and they had the most beautiful confidence in me, that I didn't have in myself, and that helped me to do it. So
Mm.
there's a lot that needs to be changed and fixed, but I think most of it isn't really coming from the woman herself. It's all the external factors.
Yeah, for sure. And exactly the same for me. My second birth, I had NHS home birth midwife, but we have a really lovely little home birth team. And as you say, they had full confidence in me, and I barely interacted with them for my entire second birth because they were just sat in the corner like quietly talking to themselves and just left me to it. And that was such a different experience to my first, where I had to drive to the hospital, surrounded by strangers, bright lights. Um, yeah, it was such a different experience, as you say, when the people around you have faith in you. And there was also a big difference in my husband and his attitude. So with my first baby, he was very typical male in that he didn't do any research either. He didn't really know what was going on. And so he was being told by the medical professionals to keep me quiet because I was so scared and I was doing a lot of screaming and shouting. And he was being told by the medical professionals to keep me quiet. And my husband is quite typically masculine. He feels like my protector. And he came away from that birth with trauma as well because he felt like he was watching me be assaulted and that he couldn't do anything about it. And
Oh
so with my
gosh.
second birth, where we were in our own space and he could defend that space, like that energy coming from him was very different as well.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. But oh, that's awful. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
I've moved past it now, and I
Yeah.
use it as a talking point. And we've done a lot of healing. That second birth really healed, like for both of us. It was such a different experience, and I'm really glad that I was able to have that second experience. And it started me on this journey, as I say. So yeah, it's part
Yeah.
of my story.
Yeah, me too. It does make you stronger and takes you down a particular path, doesn't it? And that certainly did for
Yeah.
me. But for me, the second birth was, in some ways, about. I'd read all this sort of Ina May Gaskin birth stories and stuff, but for me, the second birth was me having to sort of prove to myself that they could possibly be true, because the first birth
Yeah.
had almost done the opposite. It was like, so different and so not what I wanted. So yeah, it is
Yeah.
very healing, that second birth. But then of course lots of women don't get to have that second experience, because some women would just say, oh, well, I'm never ever doing that again. And that
Yeah.
makes me sad as well, really.
Yeah, yeah. But I'd also say that with my second birth, I had my home birth, which was my plan A, but I also made my plan B and my plan C, and I was very much at peace if I had needed to transfer to hospital, if I had needed an emergency C-section, if I had needed forceps again, I was very much at peace if I had needed that, because the second time round I was much more informed,
Yeah.
and I knew that it would have been my decision and that I would have done everything possible, to work with my body beforehand. And if I had consented to that, it was very much true consent in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that's really important as well. But again, I think most women understand that, don't they? That a birth plan isn't like, I mean, there's all these horrible ideas and jokes around women and their birth plans, being laminated and too
Yeah.
rigid. And again, it's just sexism and misogyny, really, because of course women are intelligent enough to realize that when you make a plan, it doesn't always come together, and that's, you have to have contingency plans. So um, yeah, I always call them birth plans, because I think, again, it's, this idea that women get told, oh, don't call it a plan, call it your birth wishes. I'm like,
Oh,
F off, I'm
yeah.
calling it a plan.
Yeah, exactly. I hate that so much.
Yeah.
And whenever you see advice of people saying, "Oh, don't make a birth plan. It never goes according to plan."
Oh,
But, birth is one of the most significant days of your life. And just like, applying to university, yeah, you might not get into your first choice of university. It doesn't mean you haven't applied to any others. You make contingencies, don't you?
yeah,
You plan for all big
exactly.
events.
In what other area of life are women told not to make a plan or to think about their options? Not a
Yeah.
single one. And always it's the things that give women that little bit more power that gets sort of criticized. So it's birth plans, it's doulas, it's hypnobirthing, it's antenatal classes, water birth. All of the things that put women back in the driving seat a bit, and are all the things that get sort of lampooned and laughed about and criticized. So I think that's very telling.
Mm. Yeah. Was hypnobirthing big when you started the positive birth movement? Or was it just sort of just starting to become a bit mainstream?
Yeah, I think it got bigger through social media, and but I don't. Yeah, I mean, it did exist, but maybe it wasn't as big as it is now, or as well known as it is
Yeah.
now. Mm.
Yeah. And I think social media, as you say, has had a big impact on that, because I suppose women that were researching birth, in the 90s and the 2000s, they could only see sort of heavily edited educational videos, or they could see books which were heavily edited. Whereas now anyone can take a video of their birth or take selfies during birth and share it to social media. And I do think that is important.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, actually, because when I was pregnant for the first time, which was in sort of 2007, and my baby was born January 2008, I didn't watch any birth videos, because I'd only ever seen this one birth video when I was at school in sort of biology, and it was absolutely terrifying. I describe it in my book as like dentistry, but on your nether regions. It was like something out of a horror movie. And so that was just terrifying me. So I thought, well, I don't want to watch any birth videos, because it's just going to make me more afraid. And then in my second pregnancy, there was this thing which doesn't exist anymore. It sounds like 1,000 years ago. It really isn't that long ago. It was like 2010. But it was called something like Birth TV or something. And obviously it's now completely obsolete. But it was a little website that had like 15 different birth videos on it, which was quite a lot of videos to be on one website then. And I watched one of them, and it was really transformative for me, because it was just this woman in a birth pool, and it was very dark, and there was nobody else in the frame. I know there were other people in the room, but it was just her in the water. And the water was just sort of rippling, and it was just all completely quiet. And then suddenly she put her hands down and just sort of really moved fast and pulled this baby up to her chest with her own hands. And the contrast between that image and this nightmare of dentistry on Elm Street stuff that I'd seen at school was just so, it couldn't be more different. And I was like, it blew my mind, that was a woman giving birth. It hadn't occurred to me that it could be like that. So obviously now women have got access to that sort of thing all the time. But I mean, I really think we shouldn't underestimate how powerful that is for women to be able to see that sort of film, because it really does give you the visual evidence that it's possible to give birth on your own steam, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the major differences is those videos that we watched, in biology class in school, they were very much focused like just on the vagina. Like the camera would just be like looking at the vagina, just watching the baby coming out. Whereas all the videos that we get to see now, you're actually seeing the woman's face, and you're seeing like how she's moving and how she's interacting with her partner and maybe even children around her. And I think that's very different rather than just focusing on the vagina, because when you just see the vagina, all you're thinking is, wow, that must hurt. Like, but
Yeah,
when you see the whole setup, like when you see everything, like you get a very different idea.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you see that the woman is just fine.
Yeah.
She's chatting and having a sandwich, or
Yeah, yeah,
all
exactly.
all of that is still shocking to people, because it's not just the birth, the vagina focused biology videos. It's also sort of One Born Every Minute, or the sort of soap opera births, or Rachel from Friends, or all of those sorts of births that are on screen that have to portray it as a kind of emergency, because the alternative is too boring for television. It's too
Yeah,
slow.
this is exactly what I tell people. Is like even One Born Every Minute, which is supposedly a documentary, they've taken like the five most dramatic births from that day and put them into a 1 hour show, because birth when it's going right, when it's just unfolding, is actually really boring. Like birth, like, there's a lot of standing around, there's waiting, like it could take over a day. So they have to speed it up and make it look dramatic for people to watch, because actually people probably wouldn't watch a natural birth because it's actually quite boring to observe until the very
Yeah,
last minute when the exciting bit happens.
exactly. Yeah, they just have to do that, but it doesn't help women, I don't think. And also the other thing that, and I think they did some research into One Born Every Minute. I don't think it's on anymore, is it? But when it was
No.
on, these researchers looked at it, and they showed how women were never shown making a choice, which I think is also interesting when you think about how birth is portrayed. Not just that sort of
Wow.
high drama thing, but also that there's an opportunity there to educate women that they are, they have um, rights and autonomy, and it's missed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, that's not actually ever something that I picked up on. Um, yeah, you don't see them making choices. It is just always kind of medical professionals saying, well, now we're going to do this, and now this is going to happen.
Yeah,
Um, and I
and the
think
research is. I
I
was
can
going to say,
sort of only recall maybe like once or twice where there's a woman in a position that's not in a bed on her back.
mm,
Because I
yeah,
did watch it during my first birth, thinking, oh, this would be a great way to get prepared. I'm going to watch this incredibly dramatic series to get me prepared for the realities of childbirth. And it wasn't really until afterwards I thought that wasn't a good idea at all.
no. But then, if you were clued up about birth physiology, you probably wouldn't volunteer yourself to be on a documentary like that, would you? Because you wouldn't want anyone to disturb to burst your birth bubble
Yeah,
with a camera or a silly, sound engineer or something. So
yeah.
I think women are maybe self-selecting for that program, who don't realise that even being on the program itself could affect their chances of having a straightforward birth.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, and it also occurs to me that when we see birth depicted in like, in drama, like fictional birth, like Friends or various other programs, you don't really see true birth at all. It's always just like, water's going and then you go to the hospital and it's got to fit within a half an hour slot. And the baby comes out and there's no sign of an umbilical cord or a placenta or anything
Yeah,
else,
no,
and anytime anytime that, a doula is represented or someone that's chosen a home birth, they're kind of presented as being like a bit crazy. Like I can remember there was an episode of Neighbours where a doula was hired, and she came in like wafting like sage, and she had bangles and a caftan.
Mm.
And that was the only time that I've ever really seen a doula like represented on television, and she was made out to be a lunatic.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? It's it's got such long roots, this idea of women as healers and, being persecuted.
Mm,
That's It's so obvious when you sort of start to think about it, and but it's such a shame, isn't it, that a woman who's, to be portrayed like that and discredited and mocked and laughed at. Again, I think it shows, just like the way birth plans and everything are mocked and laughed at. It just shows that that is a place of power. And
yeah,
that's why it's happening.
yeah,
And in Give Birth Like a Feminist, I write about the history, and the idea of women as healers and midwives. It goes back such a long way. And then there was a real patriarchal takeover of the birth room. And I think anything like a doula sort of represents a little tiny bit of that history of women's knowledge and women's power, and therefore it has to be discredited. But it's horrible to see.
it is. Yeah, and you don't realize it until you've kind of been through that, because when I first watched the episode of Neighbours with that doula, I was young, I wasn't married or pregnant or anything yet, and I laughed along with everyone else. I was like, haha, like that's
Yeah,
crazy. And it wasn't till I'd been through that and I then learnt about doulas and positive birth and all this, that I then thought to myself, like, that's really quite damaging. That is a really
yeah.
damaging thing. It was just a really silly little thing on an episode of Neighbours 7 years ago. But that's
Mm.
damaging.
Yeah, it's like a power flex, isn't it? And it's like, it reminds me of that. There was this conference in Ireland when Meghan Markle was pregnant, and
Yeah.
the guy said something like, they were all obstetricians, and he referred to her and he said, a doula and a willow tree. Let's see how that goes. And all
Mm.
of the obstetricians in the audience laughed. And it was the same. I mean, the people said to me, "Well, what does he mean about the willow tree?" And he means what you were just talking about. He means like the smudging stick or the
Mm.
jingly bells or the crystals. I don't know why he picked a willow tree, but just this idea that it's all this wafty women's stuff, old wives, all of that is so much misogyny, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the thing that I find really unpleasant about it is that there's an undercurrent there in what he said, and it's the same in like Adam Kay's book as well, where he jokes about the woman who ended up having a cesarean. That the undercurrent is of someone who's actually quite pleased when that doesn't go right. When, say, Meghan Markle had ended up having a cesarean, which she didn't, I don't think, or perhaps we'll never know. I don't remember, but you know, it's almost like see, I was right. There's got to be an element. If you're going to make a joke like that, then there's got to be an element of you that's going to be, righteously chuffed with yourself when that woman ends up in
Yeah.
surgery. And when you think
Yeah.
about it like that, it's actually really quite disgusting, isn't it? Because it's like saying, taking pleasure in a woman being basically cut open. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
but it is
Um,
that power flex between the sort of patriarchal medical model, and these are all the things that are absolutely right, and can't be challenged. And these are, the male side of things. And I don't mean just men. I mean, patriarchy involves women as a system involves women as well. But it's got that masculine element of energy, of, tools and medicines and da da da. And then on the other side, you've got the sort of the wafty female, silly crystal holding. It's a power flex.
it is, yeah, because as far as I'm concerned, if you want crystals, why not? Like what? Why
Yeah.
do people feel the need to mock that? What? Why do people feel the need to mock? Even if a doula did come in waving sage, okay, if that's what makes the birthing woman feel comfortable, like what's wrong with that?
Well, exactly. I mean, if a man had to give birth, they might want to have a crystal as well. I mean, we all have our ways and means of helping ourselves through difficult experiences. I think in the Positive Birth book, I wrote a bit about affirmations in sport, because I thought it's quite interesting when you look at it, how much they use that psychology in sport. And yet in birth, that whole idea of affirmations again gets that kind of like, oh, that's just a load of women-y kind of woo, that's just, it's just, put your feet in the stirrups, love, and get on with it sort of thing.
Mm.
But actually, all the top athletes, and I gave the example of quite a lot of male athletes, deliberately use what do they call them? They don't call them affirmations, they call them positive mental statements or something. I can't remember, but it's the same principle.
Yeah.
They say things over and over to themselves, like the top tennis players who win Wimbledon, and they visualize the goal in the football arena, and they visualize their boot hitting the ball, and they use all of those same techniques that help their minds, and therefore help their body, and have the power to change the course of their story and their success without being criticized. But that is
Mm.
only what women are doing if they want to have, like you say, a crystal or a bit of incense burning. It's just to help your mind, isn't it? It's to help you feel stronger. And it doesn't matter whether that's
Yeah.
having a certain person with you, or a photograph, or a crystal, or whatever. Who cares if it helps you?
Exactly. And that's exactly how I win over skeptical birth partners on my hypnobirthing courses is I'll talk about sports and visualization, and I usually show them a little clip of Johnny Wilkinson, the England rugby fly half.
Yeah.
And I show him lining up a kick, and he's doing his little hand thing, and he's then sort of his eyes are going from the ball up to the post, and he's visualizing that ball going over the post, and it
Yeah.
worked for a World Cup winning fly half, so why can't it work for your wife when she's in labor?
Exactly. Yeah, that's really good to do that. I'm really glad you do that. I've just remembered what it's called. Positive self-talk, they call it in sports.
Right. They had to put a masculine name on it because we can't call
Yeah,
it something fairy like affirmations, can we?
exactly. But it's exactly the same idea anyway.
But it's also exactly the same as praying.
Mm.
Religion is still very rife throughout the world. Lots of men practice religion and you pray, and that could be considered along the same line, couldn't it? But we don't mock that.
Yes, well, it is the same, really. It's manifesting, isn't it?
Mm.
And also gratitude is another big part of prayer that people do every day. So all of these techniques, like you say, if you package them up differently, people receive them differently. But there's something about the birth stuff that gets mocked, and that's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So over the course of you and the positive birth movement and writing your books, have there been any developments that surprised you, that shocked you, anything that you didn't expect coming from that?
Ooh, well, that's a good question. Um, I think I was quite surprised a year or so ago to discover. Well, I guess I'm always surprised when women are against, how can I put it, sort of, when women see it as progressive to think of perhaps the concepts like 100% cesarean or 100% formula feeding. Um, I think you put me on the spot slightly here, but I'm trying to remember. But I was part of this panel a year or so ago where there were some women who were arguing against the WHO code, um, around the World Health Organization code, around restricting the advertising of formula milk,
Mm.
and were arguing that formula should be available to everyone. Well, I agreed with them that formula milk should be free. I think that would be great. I don't see a problem with that. But the idea of lifting that code that has been, if you look at the history of it and what organizations like Nestle, companies like Nestle were doing to exploit women, especially vulnerable women, and why that code was set up in the first place. I found that sort of idea surprising. This idea that freedom, oh God, perhaps I need another coffee. What am I trying to say? But you know what I mean? This idea that freedom is always means I think there's a sort of lack of understanding of freedom of choice, that women can't be influenced in different ways, and that freedom means allowing everything to happen. And just I don't think that it works like that. I think, women, advertising is powerful. For example, with the case of formula, there is a possibility, of course, that women will be influenced by advertising and by the tactics of formula companies.
Mm.
So that surprised me, and I think that I can see us heading in that direction a bit at the moment. It's not just about formula. I'm maybe not being very clear. It's more about the mistaken idea that that freedom is just everyone being able to make any choice they want to make. Um, Whereas I think, obviously, that just completely ignores the external influences in culture that will, be or can be detrimental to women. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm also always very surprised that that freedom, it seems to almost pit women against each other. So you do
Mm.
see, like, when you sort of have these sorts of posts talking about the WHO code and formula and what have you, it seems that anyone on one side, they seem to take it as a personal attack. And we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to raise our children as best as we can. Yet whenever you sort of offer those freedoms up, someone seems to take it as a personal attack, and there's always so much polarization, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes it's seen as kind of like almost anti-woman or anti-feminist
Mm.
to come down on the side of, say, breastfeeding or natural birth, because that's somehow misread, in the sense that you're saying all women have to do this, and that you're judging women who don't. But I think it's just that the evidence is clear that straightforward vaginal birth is more satisfying for women, and obviously not if it's traumatic and it's a forceps delivery and you're completely disrespected. I'm talking about like proper empowering, a really wonderful empowering experience. It's better for women. No woman wants to have a traumatic birth. No woman wants to be rushed into theatre and feel like really terrified. So it's the same with feeding. Like 85% of women want to breastfeed, but so few of those women are still breastfeeding after sort of 3 weeks, 6 weeks,
Mm.
3 months. The numbers just plummet.
Yeah.
So, you know women aren't being supported to have those experiences at all. And so the other thing that's really odd, I think, is this idea of, I think another thing that has surprised me, you asked what surprised me, is this, I suppose it's a part of the same package, is this idea that there's this almost like a cult of natural birth or a natural birth agenda, and that it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I've been, lumped into that package as well, and I find that really surprising, because it's like, this is just saying that women's bodies work, and that they're not being given the opportunity to work. They're not being properly supported to work by the culture we live in, by the system that we've built, by the birth rooms that we've built, by the maternity care system that we've built. Um, so yeah, it's strange. This, and I joke about it. It's like, well, if there is a cult of natural birth, it's not a very successful cult, because you know I
Yeah.
mean, my
Yeah.
bank account is empty, from all my cult members. So I have to be honest, like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
doing really badly on my cult leader stuff these days.
Yeah, but that thing about, it's being dangerous to tell women that they have autonomy over their bodies. I get accused of that as well, because I do social media posts about, I'm not telling you to say no, I'm telling you you can say no. And, my advice about, doing your research and making your own decisions, that's exactly what I would tell a family member getting a tattoo or having laser eye surgery. Like, don't just go
Yeah.
and do it. Do your research, research different tattoo artists. And if that doesn't sit right with you, the way that they're doing things, and go somewhere else. That's no different to the advice I give to pregnant women.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's all very, so that is quite strange. I think that whole phenomenon is quite strange. That sort of backlash against women like you and like me, who are sort of just literally just saying to women, you have a choice, you know, it's your body.
Mm.
The sort of pushback against that is surprising in a way, isn't it? But
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't be surprised by it, because obviously, we live in a world where, if you look at the global picture and the historical picture, female autonomy is, there have been very many different ways in which that that has been suppressed, or people have tried to suppress it. So this is just another
Yeah.
manifestation of that, I think.
Yeah, and that's centuries in the making. So, a few years of
Mm.
us doing this, maybe it's not going to make as much of a difference as we'd like it to, but we need to keep going.
The other problem, though, I think in the mix is that so many women are damaged and hurt from their own experiences,
Yeah.
and it makes it very difficult for them to contemplate that. It's easier in a way for them to believe what they were told, which is that their body let them down, than for them to feel the pain of knowing that it could have actually been different for them. They could have had a different birth experience, or they could have breastfed, because a lot of women really wanted that, and then felt a lot of sadness after it didn't work out for them, and then that sadness is sort of compartmentalized away, I think. And when women like us talk about birth or breastfeeding as being possible for women, I think it really triggers something, and it triggers a lot of pain. And obviously, we've got a system that's full of women and men who are also carrying that compartmentalized pain around with them as well. Lots of obstetricians have never seen a normal, straightforward birth. Just like me, when I had my second baby, I had no evidence. I'd read about it in Ina May Gaskin's book, but I had no first-hand evidence that it was possible. And they haven't got it, and lots of midwives haven't got it because they've had trauma, and
Mm.
or they've witnessed a hideous amount of trauma. I mean, some of the midwives I talked to are damaged, and they know they are, from witnessing day after day of women's bodies being disrespected. So there's
Yeah.
all of that in the mix as well, which makes this another reason why this conversation is so emotive, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, for the women themselves going through it, if they do try to talk about it, often they're told just be grateful your baby's alive. Just be grateful that your baby's fed. Just be grateful that you're here. And
Yeah.
they're made to feel that if they say that their birth experience wasn't a good one, that they're somehow ungrateful for their baby.
Yes, that's all in the mix too. I've definitely written about that in Give Birth Like a Feminist. This idea
Mm.
of the bad mother, not wanting to be the bad mother. Like you say, all that matters is a healthy baby is the mantra that gets repeated. And, to complain in some way about the birth experience, like you say, kind of marks you out as maybe not being selfish, being that worst type of thing, a selfish mother. Because how can you be thinking about your own birth experience when you've got a baby in your arms? I mean, I can literally
Mm.
hear people saying that. It's you have to focus on your healthy baby.
Yeah,
But then the underlying message of that is that women don't matter.
yeah, yeah. And you don't forget. Like I know that everyone says, "Oh, once that baby's in your arms, you'll forget it all." You don't
No,
forget. You
no, of
don't
course
forget.
you don't. No, no, you don't.
No.
And likewise, the flip side of that coin is that a really positive experience can change you forever too, and stay with you forever too, and give you
Yeah.
strength.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. My second birth made me feel unstoppable. Like that moment where I was the first person to touch my daughter and I picked her up out the water and I put her on my chest. Like that was the most incredible experience of my life. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
amazing.
So with more women, it would be great if more women could have births like that. That's all I've ever thought about and wanted. But
Yeah.
it seems to be uh, a difficult thing to achieve.
It is, yeah, but I think we're on the right path. I think with more and more people like us speaking about it and making content around it and it becoming more mainstream to see it, it is changing in the right direction, I think.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear you say that. That gives me hope.
So I have really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think we're talking about trying to keep it concise. We've been talking for an hour, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. And you've got a new book coming out this year. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, okay, thank you. It's called can't even speak, Ultra Processed Women. And it's coming out on the 3rd of July, but you can pre-order it now from any good bookshop, online or off. And it's like I say, it's a bit of a departure for me, but there's still a lot of overlaps. It's I became quite interested in the conversation that was happening around ultra processed food, and I noticed an absence of specific information and focus on women in that conversation. And so I thought, oh, I could write a book about that, and so I did. So yeah, it's about the impact of ultra processed food on women's bodies, but it's also looking at women's role in food, and how advertising has manipulated that to sell us these products which are damaging our female bodies in very specific ways, and also damaging Mother Earth, who's also female. Um, so yeah, it's I'm really proud of it actually. I think it's a good book. So hopefully other people will agree.
Well, I have already pre-ordered it, so I am really excited to read it when that comes out.
Oh, bless you. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Yes, please do. If anyone is interested, please do pre-order it, because that makes a really big difference for writers.
Mm.
It's just to do with, how the numbers at the other end, but it really helps. It helps a book to fly. So that would be great.
So, do you have any parting words, anything that you would like to sign off on, any sort of words of wisdom for anyone listening to this podcast that's starting their positive birth journey?
Oh, well, just listen to your body, I guess, and get informed as much as you can, but also, rewind back a bit and have a little think about your relationship with your body, and focus on that in your pregnancy a bit, and work on your confidence in your body and your love for your body. And that will help you to listen to it, because we can't listen to something that we have no confidence in or love for. So that's my pearl of wisdom of the day.
Perfect. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a review and hit subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear from you, so if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, or a question you'd like answered, or if you'd like to share your birth story, please get in touch by email or DM me on Instagram. Until next time, take care.